All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on a Tuesday afternoon to learn a little bit about organic gardening practices. We've got Tad Hussey from KIS Organics, myself, Chad Westport from Twin Peaks Cannabis, and you can catch us live on the KIS Organics YouTube channel, as well as the Chad Westport YouTube channel, regardless of where you're watching. If you type your question into the comments, they all funnel into what I'm seeing here and what Tad is seeing there. So we will be sure to try and get to all of the questions. We've got a fun topic that you all might be interested in for this episode. We're going to be talking a little bit about cover crops. But first, I want to recap. Tad, you just went and had a freaking magical weekend. You actually did a little bit of speaking and educating yourself. Can you tell everybody what that event was and what it was like?
Yeah, absolutely. So Grassroots Fabric Pots, who we work with, KIS Organics, they threw a conference. It was the second one that we've attended. This is the second one they've held. And this one was in Pahrump, Nevada at Steve Cantwell of Green Life Productions at his farm. So it wasn't at his facility, but at his vegetable farm where he also lives on the property. He's got a little bit of acreage in there. Steve's awesome. Not only was he an amazing like MMA UFC fighter, so he's just this like massive alpha human. Right. You just would never mess with. But he's also like just the nicest guy, and he's got a really unique perspective on cultivation. So at the conference, you had like they called the first day Science for the Bros, and that was like we led that off. So KIS Organics. So we were talking, it was me, Dr. Ben Higgins, and then Brandon Hudson. And I talked about like 6 years of podcasting, like my favorite highlights from that. And then I also gave a talk about like what inputs you can use in your garden, like what's safe, what's sustainable, just kind of doing a deeper dive on the research around these things. Cause there's been some talk of like bone meal and blood meal and feather meal being like fake organics because they come from the slaughterhouse industry. And that fish-based products are healthier and safer. And so I did some actual research into that because I wanted to find out what information really exists. So that was the talk I gave. And then Bryant Mason, Soul Doctor Consulting. I know you're familiar with Bryant. He crushed it in the talk, and there was also a talk on sap testing. And then from there, they kind of translated or transitioned into the next day of talks. It was a lot of people talking about regenerative agriculture. I would say a little bit from more of like a spiritual perspective, less science, more experiential, just how they love the plant and want to approach cultivation, which was interesting. So, and then like on the last day, they kind of had growers. And then Jeremy from Build a Soil was the last speaker on the last day to wrap things up. And unfortunately, we had to catch a flight. So we had to leave like right at the very beginning of his talk in order to get home. But it was a lot of fun. Everyone was super cool. Dr. Elaine Ingham was there too. I know a lot of people like the work that she's done for Soul Food Web. Green Bodie. Trying to think who else. There was Mike Catalyst Bioamendments, Dragonfly Earth Medicine, a lot of these companies that many people are familiar with. So even though we don't all agree on how to cultivate, we were all there in the same building. In fact, okay, I just have to share this because this is funny. So Steve, being Steve, he uses a little bit of all of these philosophies and really kind of like joins us all together. I think he's really like the fabric that holds this everything together because he likes all of us and uses little bits of everything. So he does soil testing, but then he's also in the Soul Food Web camp where he wants to do all this stuff from microbes and, he cover crops, which we can talk about too. Stuff that's a little less sciencey. But what he was saying is to really hype it up, what we should do is do like a tournament bracket with like debates. So like maybe we get up on stage with Elaine Ingham and dispute or have a debate about so the Soul Food Web versus mineralization and soil testing, and as long as we're not being, as long as there's no personal attacks, like, I think it would be awesome, because at the end of the day, like, if I can't explain and defend the way I choose to cultivate and why, and can't be open-minded to learning things and challenging it, then like I probably shouldn't be doing it, So
Yeah.
I would be pumped to do it, because I would love to bring the science to support why we do the things that we do. I think it'd be a blast. So I thought that was a fun idea to just have all these like people, debating these ideas.
That would be so rad, because there is a lot of knowledge out there, and that really is, like you said, you have to enter it with an open mind. You have to enter it with the notion that your opinion may be changed, may be swayed by science, may be swayed by experience out in the field, but that's how we learn. We all have a preconceived notion of how it learns, and then we learn something else that takes us to the next level. That's awesome that you were out there at Steve's facility. He really is unique when it comes to the scale of what he's doing and the methods that he's using. I don't know a whole lot of people that have successfully done it for as long as he has. So that's awesome. And it's back to you mentioned, his UFC career earlier. It's like, I was watching him fight long before I even knew about like dry amendments and all of this stuff. So that is so awesome to like see people transition into this world. And yeah, he would be the good medium, because nobody's going to talk lip to the guy without a good basis. Like, if you're going to talk smack, you better be able to back it up. So that would be fun to see.
Yeah. So while the conference, this is kind of a funny story. So while the conference was going on, at one point, because you're in the kind of like desert environment, one of his neighbors decided to like start kicking up a whole bunch of dust with their cars, like peeling out. And it was, you looked up and this giant dust cloud started coming our way. And I was like, oh, I'm going inside. Like, screw that. Apparently Brandon Hudson like saw Steve, and Steve just turns around and starts walking that direction, breaks out into a run, jumps over the fence, and like the most athletic move ever, I guess. And they just scattered. And I guess Steve came back like, oh, I was hoping to use some of my MMA stuff on these new neighbors, but like no one's messing with Steve. Yeah, it's Steve Cantwell, by the way. Yeah, super nice guy though. And there was so much weed there. It was crazy. Just an insane amount. And they were letting people smoke in the tent. Where, so while you're sitting there listening to a speaker, you're puffing on a joint or something. So like the room itself was getting hazy. I was getting a contact eye because I was trying to stay lucid, because I have to drive and I can't drive and smoke or even function well. So all in all, it was a lot of fun though. And everyone was very free with seeds. And I actually got to try the Chad Westport grape juice. Yeah, someone brought it there. So that was really cool. This guy, Prairie State, had Brandon's favorite flavor of weed, the terpene expression. And then he said that the stuff from Flora and Flame actually got him high, which is really, really hard to do for Brandon Hudson these days. He works at KIS and does all our agronomy, but he's a hardcore smoker and really can he put away 100 milligrams just to get on the plane ride home, and he didn't even feel it. So,
Totally. I definitely know. Yeah. Me and Brandon got to hang out, because it's a minimum of 100 before I get on a plane. So
yeah,
me and
was
Brandon
wishing
should fly somewhere.
He had 3 or 4 to just tackle it. But yeah, anyway, let's get on with the show. Sorry. So what do you have going on? I've been talking.
Yeah. I'm just getting ready to do seed drop, the Westport Posse. That's coming up. I'm just finishing up some feedback from other testers. I've already tested this myself, just getting their feedback, making some last minute decisions and some last minute moves. So this Saturday on my channel, Chad Westport YouTube channel, I'm going to invite all of the testers on. We're going to talk about the experience. They're going to show some of their plants. And then April 2nd is going to be the release date. But, you go into it with an idea of how it's going to work. And then some things change. And then, I'm redeciding some options here, but that'll be coming up this Saturday, and then the drop coming up. But that's fun, man. That's really where I've been spending a lot of my time and energy, figuring out the background, the logistics of, nobody wants to hear this, so I'll be quick, but like getting the website, having like the payment options, realizing that the website you just built doesn't take those payment options, and yada, yada, yada. So stay tuned.
Well, give us a quick sneak peek here on this live. Let's break the news. I don't know anything about how this went. How did the plants turn out? What was the general consensus?
Consensus was pretty good. I wish I had more feedback from my testers, to be completely honest. I've sent out, 500 to 50 different testers. I've also sent out another couple hundred to just friends. I haven't heard back from all of them, and that really helps when you do. But yeah, it's turned out good. People are pulling great stuff. One of my main testers, John is in here. He says, getting ready for the second run of the Westport Posse. He had harvested the first one the other day, sent me a little picture of a rolled up joint with maybe a couple totes off it. He's like, I already feel it. So that's good. Nice. If John's feeling it, it's good. It's good. But yeah, people are tuning in. Steve Cantwell is a guy who they should definitely check out. And I'm pretty sure you have some interviews with him on the Cannabis Science and Cultivation podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. But yes, that's correct. I know it's a mouthful.
Sorry,
I interviewed Steve. We had a wonderful conversation because a lot of people put us as like against each other because he does a lot of practices that I don't promote. And I guess vice versa. So we had a really good conversation about it, and we're actually pretty aligned on most stuff. He just has a slightly different philosophy. And I think we should talk about it. About it.
Well, let's go into cover crops. Everybody in chat, cover crops, get your questions and your favorite ones in there, and hopefully we can get to them. But that's one of the main differences. And I want to kind of highlight cover crops, like its traditional role, like in general agriculture, because I find a lot of stuff that we do as like cannabis growers, and particularly as cannabis home growers, because we're experimental. We have, we don't have the balance of the company riding on this next harvest. We can make some mistakes. There can be some learning errors. So as home growers, we like to try a lot of stuff, and we see stuff that works for like big ag or for big grows, and we're like, well, then it must translate. So we'll get into that. But I want to talk real quick too is just, again, the traditional role. In agriculture, big fields, big farms, you drive by, and we see this a lot, like Mount Vernon, Skagit Valley area in Washington, which is where I did my schooling. So a lot of times farmers will let a field be fallow for a few years, a year or two, just to kind of let the soil recover from the abuse of the chemicals and whatnot. And fallow just means it's an empty field. You're putting it to the side, you're not using it. And it breaks our hearts as like organic soil people to see a bare and empty field. The role of cover crops, where it plays, is so there's a lot of things that can erode your soil layer. And we know the organic layer is like the top layer. Things like wind erosion. If you just leave a bare dirt field, whenever that wind comes through, it's taking off top layers. It's getting rid of the organic matter. It's stripping like the stuff you want in there. So wind erosion is one thing that cover crops is used for. It's also used for like water erosion. When we get a lot of rain coming down and it hits the soil, it splashes, it compacts it. When you have cover crops, it kind of cushions the fall, I guess you could sort of say. So it helps the soil structure in that aspect. And then, of course, the popular, nitrogen fixation, legumes, clover, these types of things. Like it fixes atmospheric nitrogen. It pulls it in through its leaves, and then it deposits it in the soil. And that's one method, which I don't think is really a great thing to bank your nutritional regimen on. And we could touch on this too. It does add some, but I don't think the amount that people think. And then again, finally too, just cover crops. A lot of people will chop and drop it. The nutrients and the minerals it pulls in, you cut it, drop it, leaves it on the soil. to return to the soil for future plant use. So that's kind of how cover crops traditionally, at least as I understand it, have been used in modern agriculture, for fallow fields, protecting the soil structure. Is there anything you want to kind of add to that as far as like a background before we get into how it's used in cannabis and maybe how it's used in some home growing, but just on a general agricultural level for cover crops?
Yeah, I think we have to think about the reason we're using a cover crop. So you mentioned a lot of them. I frame it slightly differently, but I'd be saying the same thing. So essentially, we might use a cover crop to increase organic matter percentage in the soil, because it's not practical to put out hundreds and hundreds of tons of compost on a field, but we can grow a crop there. We might use it for nutrient management, like you said, to fix nitrogen or keep nutrients from eroding away. We might use it for water management, moisture management, to keep water, near the surface of the soil. And then erosion is the biggest reason, like you mentioned. Bare ground, stuff's gonna blow away, wash away. You don't get good soil structure when you just have bare ground. And then lastly, compaction. So certain crops are really good at breaking up soils and dealing with compaction, especially in heavy clay soil. So those are all the reasons to use cover crops on an agricultural scale. And then the last reason, I think, is more of a philosophy. Is a lot of people think like, what would happen in nature? How do I mimic nature? Well, by having other plants in my garden, that gets me closer to what might happen in a natural system. But those would be the pros. Now, personally, I think the cons outweigh the pros when we talk about an indoor garden. Huge proponent of cover crops outdoors, but I think indoors, the reasons I choose not to use them and the reason some folks do, I think is a more nuanced conversation.
Absolutely, and I want to dive into those nuances too, because everybody, different strokes for different folks. That can summarize what's going on in my head. But there are, like you said, there are pros, water management, which we'll touch on. But there's also some cons, and home for pests, home for pathogens. That could be some of them too. When we're talking though about like cover crops indoors, again, Steve Cantwell, he uses them in his facility. He's in big beds. I do see a lot of cover crops in like small sit buckets, like something 2 feet by 1 feet or 3 by 2, or a 5-gallon container, 7-gallon containers. Do you see one being more practical than the other? If they were going to cover crop indoors, would it be really more for a bed? Is it, I don't know, what without giving away my opinions, because I have my opinion, but
Yeah. So for those interested, I'm just going to share a blog post I wrote. It's literally called "Why Cover Crops Don't Belong in Indoor Gardens." It's not posting to your channel, so I will send it to you in private chat, Chad, and you can share it on there. Yeah. I don't know why it doesn't. I can't seem to send links on your channel. But here's the thing, and Steve and I have talked about this. One of the reasons I think he gets away with cover crops is because he lives in the desert, and if you saw Pahrump, Nevada, there's not a lot of pest pressure there. So I think it's very different, and he fully acknowledges on the podcast that if he were in an area that had a lot more pest, it may be more challenging. He's also very thoughtful about the way he lays out his cover crops. So he'll run, something like an indicator plant, or a trap plant closer to the front of his beds where he walks down the aisleway. And then somewhere in the back that's less accessible, he's going to run something. In his case, I just heard him talk about it. He's going to run something like a mint, specifically as a way of keeping mice and rodents out of his garden, because when he stopped using it, he found mice and rats were showing up in his grow. So that's what he uses it to deter in this case. He also uses African marigolds. He says that helps with his some of his pest pressure.
As a trap plant, you're using the marigold as like a trap plant.
As a deterrent. He thinks it repels certain. It's more likely to repel certain insects. I believe that was That was what he was saying. I know marigolds in theory, true African marigolds have an odor to them that's supposedly repellent to certain insects. How well that works when that's the only food source around and they want to eat, that's where I'd get a little skeptical. But he, and then he runs dichondra as his main cover crop base across the rest of it. And then he runs his whole setup as seasons. So there are certain seasons when he does not run cover crops based on what's going on outdoors. And then he'll run a mulch layer at that point. Being careful with your mulch layer too, because certain mulches can be really high in carbon and can cause some issues with nitrogen availability for your plant, depending on it too. So so each cover crop that he runs has a specific purpose. And it's funny, he's giving his talk. He's like, yeah, so, you have all these options for cover crops. And if you get, so you go out there, you get like 7 different varieties of seeds and you spread them all out over evenly over your bed. And then he goes, don't fucking do that. And he starts yelling because he's like, that's a terrible fucking idea. And then he explains why he does it the way he does it, and it's very thoughtful. And I think that's a good point. Like, people just assume you just throw out crops, but really it's there for a purpose. So that's sort of his philosophy. Now, why I don't choose to use cover crops is, mainly the reasons you mentioned, because one, it's a habitat for pests and pathogens. You're creating another place for them to hang out. Powdery mildew is something that everyone's had to deal with, and those spores are very resilient. And they can, just because there's 2 species of powdery mildew that infect cannabis. One can survive down to 40% humidity, unfortunately, and they can survive on other plants. So yes, PM is specific. You may have heard, PM is specific to certain plants. So what's on your squash might not affect your cannabis. Right. That's absolutely true, but it could be the same one. And so in theory, if it's on your cannabis plant and you're trying to get out of there, and you're trying to clean the facility or the space, having a cover crop in there just could be another source of issues for you too.
It's another attractor. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the spores could be on there. So, so pests and pathogens. And then the big reason for me is because at the end of the cycle, when I go to re-amend after soil testing, I want to mix those nutrients down into the soil. I want to get them in the first 4 to 6 inches of soil depth so that the nutrients are in the rhizosphere for my next crop. I don't want to wait weeks for that stuff to slowly make its way down into the rhizosphere. So that's probably the biggest reason why I tend not to run cover crops indoors. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're very similar too. Outdoors, I absolutely believe in them. I like them. They do serve a purpose, again, for the reasons that we mentioned. Indoors, I haven't had the need to use them. I don't see the same benefit for them. A lot of times people are, and we'll get to this in a second, but just, fixing nutrients into the soil, it's not good. Okay, sorry, getting questions here. But indoors, it's something that I don't necessarily encourage people to do in a lot of situations. I'm also going to say, it usually doesn't hurt in a lot of cases, just because people aren't coming up against some of the pest pressures that we can imagine. But that PM is a real thing. What I wanted to kind of touch on too is just like some of the reasons why people use them, because they're, again, so much of what we do in cannabis is based off of other agricultural sectors, and we get about this much truth to it, and then we make it this big, and we give this big of a reason. Cover crops, similar. Now, cover crops, you mentioned, it helps with moisture retention. Now, we all know that organic living soil, you want to keep the moisture content higher. So, well, cool. Cover crops do that. I get a 2-for-1. Bang, keeps it dry. Keeps it wet. But there are alternatives. Cover crops aren't the only option. And you mentioned mulch, something like hay, something like straw. So because you are obviously an organic soil grower, what do you use to help keep your moisture levels? Because you're not using cover crops indoors. What are you using?
Yeah. So I want to point out some people are making some good points in the chat. Like, yeah, I was talking about a facility. I think a lot of this applies to a home grower too. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to live and die on this hill. Like, if you want to run cover crops, run cover crops. And we even work with facilities that do run cover crops, and we make it work. It's not the end of the world. Like, you can absolutely do it. So I don't want to discourage people from trying it. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there. What was your question before your big sneeze attack there, Chad?
Sorry, I got kind of thrown by it. But it is moisture retention in the soil. Because again, cover crops, yeah, they do a great job of it. But there may be an alternative.
So there's a lot of options for moisture retention. We use blue mats hooked up to a soaker hose sort of thing. So it's always keeping the soil moist. I don't use mulch specifically because of too kind. Specifically because of the fact that I want to reamend. I don't want to mix that mulch layer into the soil because that's going to affect the physical properties of the soil. Now, as I say this, I'm thinking it now. If I think about a small, like 5 or 7 gallon pot, yeah, you could start over. You could just scrape that off. And if you have trouble watering well evenly, you should go with a mulch or a cover crop. I think that would be a good way to improve the quality of your watering. But some other things I think about is as that cover crop gets less light, as my cannabis canopy fills out, you're going to have more dying and decaying matter down below there, which can also be things that certain pathogens can leach onto and grow on. The photos that everyone puts online of cover crops always look really nice until later in flower when they look like shit and no one puts those pictures up. So it's something to think about. One person asked, I don't know if I can't do comments, but Miss K's Garden asked about cardboard. And this is interesting because I just recently learned that cardboard has a fair amount of PFAS in it. Those forever chemicals that we don't want in our garden. And from talking to Suzanne, an entomologist, and her contacts with a pathologist at BioWorks, one of the pathologists at BioWorks, her husband works for the government specifically on this. And so that they were saying that that's where the PFAS is coming from in people's gardens, in urban gardens, is from cardboard. So I've always used cardboard and now I've stopped as of just a month ago. And I'm hoping to get someone to talk about this in more detail. But in the meantime, I just filled out a request for chip drop again to get a whole load of wood chips to my house. And that's what I'm using in my garden to fill the garden.
Wow. So did anybody else out there watching have that moment like I just did, be like, ooh, I got cardboard lining the bottom of my veggie bed outside from years ago. So it's probably decomposed. You know, originally I worried about like, oh, well, maybe there's inks or maybe there's some other things in there, but it seems safe enough. I was trying to use it as a kind of a weed preventative. Okay, PFAS, the forever chemicals that we keep finding bioaccumulates more and more. That's
I need to learn more about it. So I don't want to be an alarmist. This is just something I just learned about. One thing I did learn about PFAS though is if you look up like that Glide floss, that all has PFAS in it.
Okay.
No, Glide floss, like flossing your teeth.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So I was like,
the minty waxy stuff.
Yeah, that's what makes it so smooth in your teeth. So I actually switched to this brand called Dr. Tongues on Amazon. It's kind of expensive, but it lasts a long time and works really well. So unrelated to gardening, this is just a PFAS thing I learned. So anyway, I see a bunch of really great comments. One person, I have to go back. You guys are commenting so fast. Tad, you might be able to kill 2 birds in one stone by integrating straw as a deep mulch, and then it adds soil aeration and releases nutrients back into the soil. My thing with straw that I think of as a commercial scale person is aspergillus. That'd be my concern with incorporating straw on for a home grower. Maybe not as much of an issue, but I've also multiple times thought I was getting clean straw, and then I end up picking grass seed out of my beds for like the next cycle, and it's super, super annoying. So I'm kind of on the fence with straw. Yeah, I think it's a good option, but be aware that very, very rarely are you going to be able to get clean straw. In my experience, it doesn't have seed in it, and so you're going to get a lot of seed you have to deal with. Someone else brought up a point that straw can be sprayed with pesticides and herbicides. Yeah, that's something to be aware of too. That's a great point by Prescribed Burns. So there's no perfect option. I keep looking. I mean, there's even these hemp mats that have been created that you could use as a mulch. But they break down and they're too expensive. If they had lasted a little bit longer, and I was like, okay, cool, this might be a solution. I don't want to use plastic. I don't. Out for my outdoor garden, I'll use maple leaves, just deciduous leaves from my own yard because I know they haven't been sprayed. I'll put that as a layer over my beds, and then they just slowly break down. So it's like I'm making like a leaf mold compost in my bed, and then I'll just whatever's left at the end of the season, come spring, I can just peel that back and start growing again. So that's probably my favorite right now.
Now, how about like a non-organic kind of like mulch or cover crop acting? In my head, what I'm picturing right now is one of these, sip containers, and it has like, it looks like a diaper over the top of the container, just this, this high above the soil, which will help keep some of the moisture in, helps it from evaporating off of the soil, but it's not necessarily using an organic material like clover or straw. Does it have the same effect or the same benefit to it? Or are there still the same concerns of like creating PM with a warmer, moisture environment in that little layer there?
I don't know. I've seen people do it and it seems to work. So I haven't really experimented with it. Too wet of soil could cause higher of Fusarium and Pythium, specifically these vascular diseases that happen in the root zone. So I think that's something to be aware of, but I haven't tried it to really dive into it. And I don't know how that plastic breaks down from UV light over time and what that might be leaching into your soil and into your plants. Like there's just so many sources of contamination in our gardens now. Like I see people mentioning rice holes. Rice holes are really interesting because if the way it was explained to me by a silica expert is if rice is grown in soil that's deficient in silica, then it will actually pull up arsenic and through the same pathway. And so with rice holes, you have to be careful because if your source has arsenic, now cannabis being a hyperaccumulator is going to pull up that arsenic. So I haven't used it. My other issue with rice holes is I just don't like what it does to the physical properties of the soil. I feel like it makes my soil kind of soggy and retain more water. It doesn't give me the level of aeration that I want compared to something like pumice or even perlite or vermiculite. But maybe if you use it a smaller amount, like 5 or 10%, then that's less of an issue. I had issues with it when I tried it.
And those are more of a solid substance, the perlite and the pumice as well. Not having done this myself, full disclosure, but talking to a lot of people who have used rice holes in the past, they all kind of say like the third, fourth, fifth run, they tend to get more compaction in the soil. Like it loses its benefit after just a few runs. And for people that are trying to do the beds, they want continuous use. So that may be, something that just lingers in the soil. And I don't really know how much benefit that it would have. I don't necessarily know the negative, aside from like arsenic, but it's not a solid solution for long-term when it comes to soil aeration. Pardon me.
Yeah.
So that is there. And then there was another question in here too, talking about sand. Did I try to start this one? Oh, I didn't start. It was guilty. Let's see. But sand, there we go. It says sand is a great mulch. It's good for fungus gnats. Good for fungus gnats. Yeah. As far as a mulch layer though, well, I guess it would event some evapotranspiration. I don't know. What do you think? Or have you seen anybody that have tried this? Because I personally have not seen anybody.
I know people who have tried it specifically for fungus gnats. I I typically don't, just because I want to reuse that soil. And it's really hard to re-amend that soil when there's a layer of sand over the top, because the sand's going to change the physical properties of the soil, and it's really heavy. Now, if you're tossing your 5-gallon pot at the end, it's probably less of an issue. And then I wouldn't really worry about it. But there's also great other ways to deal with fungus gnats, I think, that don't require you to put a sand or mulch layer on even. Dan P's got my favorite already on the screen there. SF nematodes, yeah, are my favorite. BTI, Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, is another one that works really well. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. But you have to get the one specific for gnats, not the one for caterpillars. But yeah, those are two great options for fungus gnats too. Oh, you're muted, Chad.
There we go.
There we go.
At least
You're
once
back.
an episode. Thank you. Yeah, BTI is a good one. That's something that I used, just 6 months ago to help control a fungus gnat outbreak, the worst I've ever had. And it worked pretty darn quickly. It was handled within a few applications, made a tea, applied it just as I was watering. And yeah, that worked. That worked really well. BTI, cut back on water, and you should beat some. Yeah. Because mulch is. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought of one other thing that I've used in the past for fungus gnats that works pretty well is I took some neem cake or neem seed meal, and I just solubilized it, aerated it for a while. Coot actually was the one that Clackman's Coot was the one that told me to try this, so I want to give him credit for it. I think I put a couple cups in a 5-gallon bucket, let it sit for 24 hours, just aerating it, and I watered that in over the surface of the soil, and that really took care of the fungus gnats too. So that's another option that folks could try. That's really affordable. But the nematodes are really the most effective way of doing it. They're expensive, but like they will take them out, and they'll deal with things like thrips and some of this other stuff that that accumulate in the soil. So.
Sorry.
Oh, you're okay. While you're coughing, I got distracted. There was something else I was going to bring up. So apparently with the clovers, they're really good habitat for thrips and certain mites. So that's why a lot of the commercial guys no longer use clovers in their mixes.
Yeah. And then is it, like a specific clover, like red clover, white clover, I've kind of heard may attract them more, or is it just a general clover issue? Because I used clover for cover crop outside, actually.
Yeah. I think, as I understand it, and this is where I could be wrong, the varieties of clover really just determines sort of the height of the flower and the height of the leaves.
Okay.
So the red clovers tend to be taller than the white clovers. So like in the lawn, for example, we'd use a white clover just because it's easier to mow and things like that. So
cool. Okay. That helps out. But that's also, cover crops too, like indoors when I see them. A lot of times people will kind of have a bed already established with some cover crops, and then I'll see like this little seedling just trying to like break its way up, and there is some intermingling of the root zone there. It makes me wonder if the exudates are communicating or working in tandem with each other and sharing some of the nutrients. But I do worry about sometimes the drain on the soil when you have just like a fresh seedling. So have you seen a lot of people, I don't know, almost, gosh, I mean, commercially, you're really working with clones. You're not really popping seeds in soil. You're usually planting in when the plant's big enough.
But then you clone them before, because you're going to make 50 of them to run in a room. A lot of people are starting with seeds, but you're right. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking of the home grower again. Just the example that pops into my head. It was like the cover crops were a jungle, and you've got this like little seedling popping up, and I'm like, you probably benefit of just like cutting that back and then letting it grow.
Timing plays a big role with that. And the thing I think about in a small pot, like a 5 or a 7 gallon pot, if we're talking living soil, you're probably going to run out of nutrients or be pretty close just with your cannabis plant in there. So then if you add a whole bunch of other crops in a pot that are taking up nutrients, removing organic matter, removing nutrients, it's probably going to put even more pressure on that plant in terms of what's available in that soil for it. So you may have to feed it a lot more just to keep all the plants happy.
And I guess too, with my outdoor veggie garden, I rotate. Crop rotation is always a good thing because certain crops, certain plants, and I know this applies to cover crops too, prefer certain nutrients. So they may drain certain nutrients more than others, where that could potentially leave an imbalance in the soil over time. But that is also one thing that I also wanted to touch on, because we've kind of covered, moisture, how that's used for cover crops, maybe some alternatives to it, and really the reason why that's there in the living soil system. And I like that you bring up too with sand. The one thing that I didn't think of immediately is you want access to the soil still, especially if you're adding top amendments. So you still need to get under there. So we've touched on the moisture thing, but food, that is the other thing that I want to talk about, because a lot of growers are like, and I mentioned this earlier, it's like, it fixates nitrogen. I'm going to get all my nitrogen in this 3-gallon pot if I put enough clover or if I put some legumes in there.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, it's this much true, but we've made it this big with cannabis. So does it fixate atmospheric nitrogen and in a meaningful amount? So what is kind of your opinion on there? Because I think I just showed my hands.
I think that you're right. But we don't really know what levels of nitrogen we're getting. I've seen numbers anywhere from upwards of 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen fixation happening from certain legume crops. That being said, I had an interview with an agronomist, extension professor from North Dakota, and she was saying that organic nitrogen that gets tied up by this relationship. So it's basically, you have your legume that has these root nodules with these rhizobia bacteria that are specific to these legumes, and that's what ties up atmospheric nitrogen. And then when that plant dies, it's not while that plant's alive, it's just cycling nitrogen for you. It's like when that plant dies, that nitrogen then goes back into the soil. So what they typically do is they till that back in, and that's when the nitrogen really gets released. But 2 thoughts on that. So one, you're probably not getting all that much nitrogen. The nitrogen may not be available. So what they found was this atmospheric nitrogen that was fixed wasn't even available to their next crop. And at the time, It was Abby, I can't remember her last name, but you can go back and listen to the podcast. And what she said basically was they don't know quite when that's becoming available, but interestingly enough, it wasn't available to the plant. And it's probably not enough in an indoor garden anyway to make a difference whatsoever. And then lastly, like, nitrogen is something that's really hard for us, or really easy for us to add. We have a lot of nitrogen options that are excellent for a small scale grow. We're not trying to put nitrogen over hundreds of acres, so it's not costly for us. So clover is probably the one thing I would just say, I would just avoid it indoors. I don't think it really, there's other crops. And like, if I was looking to have a trap plant, then I would plant a specific plant in another pot in the room as like an indicator plant or a trap plant that I would watch for my bugs. And then if I wanted a pollen plant in there, something that would be a banker plant for my beneficial insects, I would get something like a purple flash pepper, that would work specifically with the insects that I'm releasing into the room. So, and that could be in its own pot too. So for me, I would just put these things in their own containers, because when it has issues, I can just take that container and move it out of the room, kind of thing. Or just grow your own whatever, like in the room. Like, I think there's enough light that we miss, like in the corners or in the sides, that you could grow lettuces or spinach or things that need lower light levels, maybe carrots, things like that, around your cannabis as like a companion plant, doing it for the food purpose, and knowing that you may have more pest pressure for it, but managing that, I think that's a great option. I love that idea.
And you've mentioned trap plants a couple of times, and for anybody that may not be familiar with trap plants, it's just kind of like the attractive the attractive spot to hang out. It's the cool place that the bugs want to be. If they have the choice of this trap plant or your cannabis plant, they're probably going to go to the trap plant first. And that's a good indicator of potential pest pressure that's moving into the room. Like you said, Steve kind of had it along the aisles, kind of in the doorway, because that's where we walk the most. Most bugs and pests are introduced from us into our grow rooms. So having those kind of up front and center are helpful. Also put one in the back corner, because for some reason bugs always show up first in the back corner. Or at least that's where the problem is noticed first, because it never got noticed in the first time. But the trap plants are there just to kind of help. And in a 4x4 tent, the real estate may be occupied. You may be trying to maximize that, but that doesn't mean you can't have a little plant outside of the tent, or in the room, in the kitchen, anything like that. So those are beneficial, and that's something that outdoors absolutely I use. They're a lot more common. Indoors, I don't see it as much. But Steve's facility, again, that's that would be the same size as my outdoors. So yeah, he's got a big space to work with. And then the banker plants. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say we work with a lot of facilities that do not use cover crops at all, and grow successfully as well. So I think you could go either way with it. I don't want to discourage people from trying it, but realize that you are opening yourself up to these challenges for these benefits. So as long as you
Right.
make a thoughtful decision, especially in a home grow, like you really could go either way. Like, I'm not going to judge anyone for using cover crops. I just have my reasons for not using them. But I think there's thoughtful, opinions on both sides.
There are, and it's your experience that's kind of led you to that answer, which is where anybody's real answer should come from. It is just through your experience. Try it, experiment, but go into it knowing the pros and the cons, and if it really does apply to your situation. I think that's kind of a big takeaway from today, from the conversation of cover crops. It's like, does it necessarily apply to your situation? And then if it does, weigh the pros and the cons, because as we've illustrated, there's pros, there are cons. It looks cool, and I think that's another reason why people do it. But that's the absolute worst reason to do something, is just because it looks cool, or Joe Blow is doing it without any real reason. And that's why we're kind of here doing this show, is just to explain some of the reasons behind it. Because again, it's popular. It is an organic gardening technique. Well, shoot, even non-organic. It doesn't have to necessarily be organic exclusive, but that is something that's more and more common with home growers, because I am excited that they are getting into organic style growing. Naturally, the cover crop conversation comes up because, again, moisture and soil retention, that's an important factor. I'm just kind of looking at the time. It's like, geez, we're already almost to the end of the hour. But
I wanted to add a couple more things. So it's
please.
one more plant or multiple plants that you have to manage in your garden. And at the end of the day, like, I'm not growing clover, I'm not growing marigold, I'm growing cannabis, and that's the only plant that I care about. So however I can grow that best and as easiest as possible, if I can reduce the amount of variability in my room, so the less things that I have to do, the less inputs I have to have, on a home grow, it's less of an issue. You're hanging out in there, you're spending time, you have the time to put in. But on a commercial grow, you have to think about like every touch that you make. I have a grower I talked to today. When he sprays regalia, it's $6,000. So he's going to do spray, but that's all he can afford for his IPM. He's like, oh, I love Suff oil. I got that down to $600 an application. I mean, we're just talking about numbers that can get really big. So you have to be thoughtful about what you're doing, but we can apply the same principle, because it does add up. When we start buying all of these products, whether it's, we're talking cover crops or like all these different inputs that, the cannabis industry is trying to sell you, it gets expensive and your cost of production goes up. And on a home grow, it may not be as noticeable, but cycle after cycle, it really does make a difference. If you're buying gypsum versus, some cannabis company's calcium product, it's going to cost you 10 or 20 times more.
Yeah.
So that's just something to think about. And then like for me, the things that I think about when I'm growing right now, what are top of mind are heavy metals, aspergillus, pathogens, and pests. So I'm going to do everything I can to reduce those things. So that's all I ever think about. So anything that's going to potentially raise those risks is not something that I want to do in my garden. But you can still absolutely get away with it and grow great weed. After
Yes,
saying all that.
all calculated risks. I like that you framed it that way, because again, our business isn't riding on this home harvest, so we do have a little bit more leeway to make mistakes or to experiment. And yeah, if anybody's curious, give it a shot. But again, go into it knowing the pros and the cons. I'm with you. I don't cover crop indoors, so I'll just leave it at that. A couple, you did mention inputs, though. Inputs do get expensive. One kind of carryover question that we had from the previous episode, we were talking about pH. And everybody, too, watching this episode, if you have questions about cover crops that are coming up or coming up as you're watching the replay, please leave them in the comments, because we do go through both the KIS Organics YouTube channel as well as the Chad Westport YouTube channel, and we look for the questions. And one that came in, again, we kind of were talking about pHing in organic systems last week. And the question, I'll have to get back to it here. I'll just flip to my emails. It was basically asking what ingredients can they use to handle their pH up and pH down in an organic system. What would be, considered organic to that? And I had, I brought out my bottles, which I use. Yep, that got the question. So I have, your basic general hydroponics, pH down, pH up. People recognize these bottles as probably the most commonly used things for them. There's really only one ingredient in each of them. Your pH down, which I find myself using 10 times more. Can you see the line? Yeah, so this line here, and then there's this line on the bottom. I've gone through 2 of these in the time I've gone through that much up. But the down, the phosphoric acid, which is pretty common, I would consider that organic. And then the pH up was potassium carbonate. Now, one thing that I do always advise people is sometimes they'll slip in like nitrogen carbonate or No, that's in my CalMag. Sorry, other common thing that I use. But yeah, so simple, basic, single ingredients that we use for those. I've heard lemon juice. There are some organic options out there, but this goes down to, again, like I said, KNF last week. I want to know how many milliliters I add to get how many ppm of whatever. These bottles are easy to calculate that, but some of the others, like the lemons, it's a little bit harder to quantify. Did you have any, or do you see people using other or alternatives to these? Potassium carbonate and phosphoric acid as far as pH ups and pH downs. Would I get kicked out of the organic only club for using these?
I mean, technically you would, yes.
Oh, okay.
But there's not a lot of great options for pH adjustment, in my opinion. If we're talking about purely organic options. Now, there's stuff that we use, and I think it's okay. So no one's cannabis is certified organic. Let's start there. And then when we talk about amendments that are inputs that I like to use, it's typically because they're mine, they're minimally processed, or they may be approved for use in organic production in certain cases. Like potassium hydroxide is allowed for use in organic production as a stabilizer for seaweed extract powder. So it's a little bit, it gets complicated, I guess what I'm saying. The typical things that we see for pH down, which is way more of an issue than pH up, typically is phosphoric acid, not organic, works really well, gives you good available P. that's a cheat code of using fish hydrolysate, is because it has phosphoric acid in it to stabilize it, and that makes it allowed in organic production. So you can use it if it's in fish hydrolysate. You can't use it if you just use it straight phosphoric acid, same product. So that's probably the most common one that we see being used, followed by sulfuric acid. Again, I'm talking on a commercial scale here, and I'll break it down to the homeowner version in a section. And then so phosphoric and sulfuric are the two most common. The other one that people will use is citric acid, and that is approved for use in organics. It is an organic. You mentioned lemon juice. That's the citric acid. The thing with citric acid is it's a very weak buffer. So you're going to have to use a lot more of it, and it's not going to hold the pH in your reservoir over a long period of time. So if you were to pH it at at 6.6 with citric acid and then come back the next day and you're bubbling your reservoir, it's going to be right back up where it was. So it doesn't last very long. Also, citric acid can have heavy metals, so you need to make sure to have a clean source of it. And those are really the best options that I know of. Soil management, like getting your soil to the right pH, is probably a little bit easier. And the easiest way to lower soil pH is to not make it too high when you're first making your soil. But then the second thing, things like gypsum is a great way to get calcium in there without raising pH. I know we talked about gypsum a lot last episode. Raising pH, potassium silicate is one I like to use. Eggsil 16H is sort of the powdered version of that, but again, not technically organic. You could probably get some very soluble calcium carbonate, like a egg lime. If you need to raise pH, that would work. But we typically are lowering it. But yeah, egg lime's probably the best. You can use dolomite too. You get a little magnesium, but I wouldn't do that unless you know you needed it in your soil. So.
And I just want to put this up here too. Is this? I think the issue is calling organic when it's clearly not by definition. Not related to what you just said, but I bring that up because it relates to the larger picture. I have it pulled up on my phone here earlier, but the USDA, whoever's in control of it, they're changing. They're going in and changing some of the certified organic 2024 changes. U.S. Department of Agriculture National Organic Program, the NOP. Yep. They are doing a good job of now going to the supply chain, because there's a lot of products out there that say they're organic because the way that they're maybe made or produced in that end facility is, but some of their input ingredients may not be. And that was totally fine previously, but it has caused some issues in the past. And I think this came up on again, the episode last week, where some pesticides on a neem tree that was sprayed a long time ago actually showed up in the neem product itself. But that is something that for traditional agriculture is going to be changed. It's going to be defined a lot tighter. And that's something, the reason I bring that up again is because I keep hearing that with cannabis amendments or our gardening amendments. Mm-hmm. It's like kelp is awesome, kelp is natural, kelp is good. Ooh, kelp got a lot of heavy metals in there. So by redefining what is the organic standard, I think that will help a lot of people with their dietary needs. But do we also think, or do you also kind of think or see that will be applied to like our cannabis or our gardening amendments too, as far as the supply chain for organic inputs?
Yeah, I guess to me, I started out hardcore organic. Like 10 years ago, I was the biggest organic fanboy there was. I would never even considered using any chemicals. All chemicals were bad. And then I started, and again, this is just my own opinion here. I'm sharing my opinion. And then I started to learn, small amounts of synthetic, chemical fertilizers feed microbes. They don't kill them like I was told. That's really interesting. And chemical fertilizers can be mined products and minimally processed in some cases, and are actually pretty safe. They can be cleaner than organic sources. And so I guess as I've been learning now, I look at each product individually on a case by case basis. And I think about it from a sustainability perspective too. Like if I'm having to ship something all the way across, from India, for example, a neem cake, what's the fossil fuel cost of that? If I really want to talk about what's good for the environment,
Yeah.
I think that's something to think about. So yeah, I mean, I guess to me, it's less of an organic versus synthetic chemical conversation. I look at, everything's a chemical, everything's a salt, potentially
Sure.
a mineral salt, depending on what form it's in. And we just have to find ones that are more sustainable for us to use. And if we can source those locally, if we can make them ourselves, then by all means, let's look at that. So yeah, I guess, I don't know. That's all I want to say on that. I did kind of want to tease a topic for the next episode that I haven't prepped you on. I don't know how you feel about it.
Let's do it. Let's tease.
So, okay, sorry. I'm getting caught up by reading the comments and it's throwing me off my my game. Coot's never given me any money to start a company. Coot, it was a good friend of mine. I actually paid him money for selling the Coots mix, but we've kind of fallen out of touch recently because now he works with Jeremy over at Build a Soil, for those interested, because Jeremy's a bigger company and can pay him more money. But yeah, I have nothing bad to say about Coot. He's a good guy. I'm grateful. One of the things I talked about in my talk, so I'm getting a little off topic, was the best advice he ever gave me was a quarter cup to a cup per cubic foot of any amendment is a pretty safe rate depending on NPK. That's where the KIS mix got started for me, was experimenting with that. So if you just want to make your own soil, quarter cup to 1 cup per cubic foot for most amendments is a pretty good range to start. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Coot is a hoot. We all love Coot.
He is. He's a character. Yeah, we've had our ups and downs, but yeah, I'm very grateful for what he was in the industry. But let me give you this teaser.
Yes, tease it.
Distracted, and let me know what you think. So this was the start of my talk, one of my talks, and so it's called "What Inputs Are Safe in Your Garden." So I wanted to start by looking at the common agricultural fertilizers. As you guys know, the industrial meat industry is awful. There's no denying that. These animals, they're fed GMO grains and antibiotics, or crops that have been sprayed with glyphosate, which is Roundup. Yeah. Therefore, these fertilizers are going to be contaminated with GMOs, with antibiotics and pesticides, and you're contaminating your crop when you use them. Bone meal, blood meal, feather meal, they're not truly organic. You could say that they're fake organic because they come from the waste streams of our industrial meat supply.
Right.
So then what are the alternatives, right? So you have things like fish bone meal and fish meal. They're so much better because they're from the ocean. And if you get a good source like wild caught fish, then you're using cleaner amendments in your garden and you're not supporting the horrible meat industry, which is an all-around win. Now, that is a very compelling argument. It speaks to me on so many levels, emotionally, as an environmentalist. But what I wanted to do and give a talk, like for next talk, which is what I did a whole presentation on, was what does the research really show us? Are these claims true? Like, are these things safe to use in our garden, or are they full of heavy metals? Are fish products cleaner or more sustainable? I thought that was really interesting.
I love it.
I'll have some research to actually, support or refute this idea, which I'd love to share if people are interested.
I would love to do that, man. I would love to dive into this topic, particularly living next to an ocean. I have a ton of natural resources near me, but do I feel safe using them? Find out next time when we talk about it. So yeah, that's awesome. Right. I love it because again, this is another one where now we do have data to quantify some of these things, some of the suspicions we had. Data, kelp, heavy metals, perfect example, easily relatable. A lot of people have heard heavy metals can show up in kelp. We have data, so I'm sure that one will come up. But also too, like we said, sometimes we get this much and then we turn it into something this big. Because apples have arsenic in it. I'm drinking arsenic juice. No, I'm not. But there is a little bit of arsenic in there and I should be aware of it. And it may bioaccumulate to a certain level that will eventually cause me to fail cannabis testing. So yeah, awesome topic, dude. We will get into that next week. Everybody, put your boxes of what you're using, whether it's feather meal, blood meal, bone meal. What are you using for your amendments? Put those in the comments of the video on our channels, and we will try to get into those specifically on the next one.
Yeah, or talk about why you don't use something, because I think to me that's more interesting, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think we can find an issue with just about every amendment, and so we have to be really thoughtful about this process, unfortunately. But yeah, I have my favorites, and I'm so curious to hear what others are. If you do, just this is a side note, just something I saw recently as a PSA. If you feed your kid those little applesauce packets, there was a big recall because some of them were like thousands of times too high, too many ppms of arsenic because of lead. You're right, lead, because of a mixer, because apparently it was getting made, like shipped to like South America, and they were using a grinder that was releasing lead. Our economy and our food supply chain is wild, just like how far it reaches. I think about now, like, and this is where it comes to the organic and chemical thing. Like, am I better off buying that like hydroponic or greenhouse grown tomato from California that's not organic, that was probably, potentially sprayed with legal pesticides here in the Washington, in the United States, versus that organic tomato that was grown supposedly in organic practices from like China or Mexico or South America? I mean, shit, they could be growing right next to an aluminum smelter like I had here in Washington, and the soil could be full of arsenic, and that would be a totally acceptable organic grow. So I don't know. It's scary. Like
it is, yeah. Which is why I love home grows, man. Do it yourself. Be in charge of your controls and your inputs, and know what's in your inputs. That's what we'll get into next time, because yeah, this is a great topic, Tad. Thank you for bringing that up. And I would like to find out what not to use. There's a lot of options out there. We're told everything is great, but we'll talk about what not to use on the episode next week. This has been a fun one,
man. This was a fun one. We'll do more questions next time too. We got to talking too much. Yeah, mostly me. I'm sorry.
we did. No, great topic. I'm glad we covered it, because again, the cover crops is something that I see a lot of home growers gravitating to, just because they see a lot of larger people doing it, and sometimes we do things without knowing the reason. So I'm glad we were able to touch on some of them, and everybody take from it what you will. We appreciate you guys hanging out. Definitely leave your comments in the comment sections on the episodes. Any closing words, Tad?
No, I just really appreciate everyone. This has been so much fun, and I can't wait to do it again. Love it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Party on. We will see you next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will be back, and we'll be talking what not to use. So let us know what you're using. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Everybody, have a great day out there. Thank you.